Hello, good evening. So this is the last session of Art After Culture today, and it involves a performance, a lecture, and then another performance. First is the New Red Order's Crimes Against Reality. Keller Easterling will deliver a lecture on superbugs and maybe take a couple of questions afterward. Then to close out the evening will be Ruanne Rahme and Basel Abbas's performance, which is called At Those Terrifying Frontiers, where the existence and disappearance of people fade into each other. Just something of a question during this session, which harkens back to the beginning, the intro of the conference yesterday, which is, what does artist autonomy mean, or how might it operate when the work involves proxies, accomplices helping to scan culture, avatars of illegal bodies, and recombined auto-tune poetics? What is art after a culture of enduring innocence? A culture after culture run perhaps by superbugs who may or may not eat until they die, or run a continual apparatus of spectatorship. Okay, so I'll introduce, just read the bio of each person before, each section before it goes on. And so we'll start with the New Red Order. The New Red Order, or NRO, is a public secret society that enlists a rotating and expanding cast of informants. Core contributors Adam Khalil, Zach Khalil, and Jackson Paulus here tonight with Jim Fletcher and Kate Valk utilize video and performance to create sites of acknowledgement, savage pronouncement, calling out, I'm just turning the page, calling in, recruitment, and cumulative interrogation to shift potential obstructions to indigenous growth. Please join me in welcoming the New Red Order to e-flux.
Do you believe in Indians?
Do they believe in you?
When did you first learn about Indians?
Did you grow up knowing Indians in your town, or just Indians on TV?
Which did you find more fascinating as a child? Indians or dinosaurs? Why?
Have you ever visited a reservation?
Have you ever longed to meet an Indian?
Why?
Have you ever asked yourself, what do I want from Indian people?
What do you think Indian people want from you?
Have you ever wanted to be savage?
Wild?
Free?
What are savages for?
Do you ever feel guilty about American history?
Do you worry about the environment?
The economy?
The country?
Current events?
Crippling depression?
Globalism?
Got you down?
Do you suffer from existential ennui?
Do you ever feel alone?
Pessimistic?
Burnt out?
Cynical?
Hopeless?
Ever wish you could just disconnect?
Or connect with something bigger?
Did you ever see Poltergeist?
Do you ever wonder if your house is built on an Indian burial ground?
Have you ever wondered what savages are for? What are savages for?
What is savage philosophy?
What is savage philosophy? And what can it do for you?
And what can it do for your business?
Hi, I'm Jim Fletcher.
And I'm Kate Valk.
We're both award-winning actors and reformed Native American impersonators.
We're here to represent the artists this evening.
Indigenous artists who participate in the art world of settler colonial states are asked to provide information on their communities and cultures, similar to the historical and ongoing relationship between the informant and the anthropologist. We intend to complicate this dynamic.
Tonight, we will inform on our own culture in an acknowledgement of solidarity and proxy. We will be accepting the role of informants, representing the informants.
But before we get into savage philosophy, let's first address the word savage.
Savage. That's pretty loaded.
It is. I just want to take another moment and acknowledge that we're operating as representatives for the artists. When we say savage, we're not saying savage. We're saying savage by proxy.
Thanks for that acknowledgement, Jim. Now that we got that out of the way, what are savages and what are they for?
The savage is a living sign that stands for us.
But an earlier us, an image that reflects our origins back to us, a deferred presence.
The savage, as a sign, creates a belief in progress, improvement, advances, and stages. It offers what we could not otherwise know about ourselves.
Dreamed up in discourse, the first people are made in the image of the poet. Poets are made in the image of the savage. Savage philosophers are poets who have survived into the age of positivism.
Language is the flower of the mouth. When the word is called the mouth's flower and its blossom, we hear the sound of language rising like the earth.
Language is the flower of the mouth. When the word is called the mouth's flower and its blossom, we hear the sound of language rising like the earth.
Heidegger.
What is savage philosophy?
Savage philosophy operates through discourse, which is not merely an instrument for the communication of thought, but an occasion for the deployment of forces.
It asserts that signs have a real and physical connection with things, that signs take part in things instead of taking their place.
If magic confuses representation with reality, savage philosophy makes representation into reality. Brighter stars will rise on some voyager of the future than shine on us. The dreams of magic may one day be the waking realities of science.
Brighter stars will rise on some voyager of the future, some great Ulysses of the realms of thought, then shine on us. The dreams of magic may one day be the waking realities of science. Fraser.
When we do philosophy, we are like savages, primitive people. Wittgenstein.
Philosophers are comparable to savages because they pay too much attention to what words mean, thinking too little about how words are used, or pay too much attention to how words are used and too little to what words mean. Either way, confusing and splitting the ideal and the real.
Reality, for some, is not just worth more than ideality, it is racially and culturally superior to it.
Splits between the ideal and the real have delegitimized savage philosophy, making it taboo.
Prohibitions against the savage have fueled desires for them. Charged with this magical power, savage philosophy keeps coming back, like the ghosts the magician convokes.
Recourse to savage philosophy presents an opportunity to reclaim a magical criticism that can explain the very real effects created by the discourse of historians, philosophers, institutions, the media, and governments.
But have we gone too far? Can our words, our discourse, have this power, this bite? Some might say savage philosophy is guilty of crimes against reality.
Guilty? What the fuck are you talking about, guilty? Guilt is the knowledge of a debt unpaid, and reality never fails to collect its debts. Savage philosophy persists because of its utility.
But to trade reality on par with ideality is not just bad faith, it's bad business. Not just a logical error, but an economic error.
Errors? Errors? Which errors offer the most advantages when this world has gone savage?
The realist in the error of imperialism still thinks as savages do, and what savages do, above all, is to confuse signs with things.
There's another example we should consider, a sign close to home. You probably see it on a daily basis, but have never noticed. Have you noticed the state seal?
Don't the Dutchman and the idealized Indian look like they could be friends? I wonder if they got along in real life. Do you think that Indian is real or imaginary?
I really don't know. Signs like these conjure reality, national or local identities, properties. So they're free to make things up as they go along.
The creation of settler colonial nation states fused with their imaginary conjures terrifying realities. Like the reality of our own occupation.
Via its erasure, its vanishing, its invisibility.
The incommensurability of this settler colonial reality calls for action. Action to commit crimes against reality.
presence of Indian bodies outside, made of marble, stone, and bronze, often signifies the presence of Indian bodies inside, made of bone, brain, hair, heart, and lung. These monuments conjure terrifying realities.
The society of statues is mortal. One day, their faces of stone crumble and fall to earth. This botany of death is what we call culture. And this is how we capture it.
Police in Connecticut are increasing patrols after vandals spray painted two statues, one in Middletown, another in New Haven.
The vandalism was posted online. Video shows a man striking the base of the monument with a sledgehammer while someone holds a sign next to it that reads, "Racism, tear it down," and another person narrates the video.
Back here at home, a Columbus statue in the capital city has also been targeted. You can see the red paint splashed all over it.
The statue was covered to keep the graphic scene from the view of visitors.
That there is the Christopher Columbus statue that was vandalized yesterday. Now, police tell us what you see there is red paint. Now, we're not sure who did this, when they did this, or why, but this comes amid an ongoing debate over Confederate statues across the U.S. Just a few days ago, we reported that a group of people started an online petition asking the city to remove the spirit of Confederate statue at Sam Houston Park. Many also consider Columbus.
Thank you so much to New Red Order and to Kate Falk and Jim Fletcher. It was incredible. And now I'd like to have the honor of introducing Keller Easterling, who is, of course, a long-time contributor to e-flux Journal. Keller is an architect, a writer, and professor at Yale. Her most recent book is called Extra Statecraft: The Power of Infrastructure Space, and that examines global infrastructure as a medium of polity. Another recent book, Subtraction, considers building removal, or how to put the development machine into reverse. Her other books include Enduring Innocence, Global Architecture and Its Political Masquerades, and Organization Space, Landscapes, Highways, and Houses in America. Her research and writing were included in the 2014 and 2018 Venice Biennales. Please join me in welcoming Keller Easterling. Thank you.
Thank you. And happy anniversary, e-flux. So, can you hear me? Art after culture. Well, just to say the simplest and most obvious thing, that culture is good at pointing to things and calling their name, but not so good at describing the relationships between things or the repertoires those things enact. It privileges declarations, right answers, universals, telos, and elementary particles. It's captivated by circular logics and modernist scripts that celebrate freedom and transcendent newness, narrative arcs that bend towards utopian or dystopian ultimates. And this collective habit of mind that seems to look for the one or the one and only is so often organized like a closed loop. And since that loop can't abide contradiction, it lashes out with a binary fight when it's challenged, favoring succession rather than coexistence. The new right answer must kill the old right answer. And here we all are, nice watery bags of stuff, of iterative processes and trial and error and mistakes, but in some kind of fatal error, we've trained ourselves to believe that we have a mind, and that mind wants to be right. And we will all, go to bed tonight thinking about the ways in which we were right all along. So oscillating between loops and binaries, an unnecessarily violent culture, having eliminated the very information it needs, is often banging away with the same blunt tools that are completely inadequate to address perennial problems and contemporary chemistries of power. So a bully is elected, a migration of refugees swells in number, an industrial disaster kills thousands, shorelines flood due to global warming. And if economic and military engagement or new technologies do not provide the solution, or if the consensus surrounding laws, standards, or master plans or algorithms provide no relief, it's as if the smartest people in the world stand with hand to brow. And dissent, also adopting a binary, exists in a world of enemies and innocents. So the binaries of wars and chest-beating sovereignties of nation remain in place as the darlings of history. Homo economicus is allowed to upstage and hold forth. The old mothballed sci-fi futurologies are brought out, and the whole thing should build to a revolution and an apocalyptic burnout. These are the hackneyed plot lines of our humanities. And since the world's big bullies and bulletproof forms of power are superbugs, thrive on this oscillation between loop and binary, it's as if what we have, there's nothing to counter them, only more ways of fighting and being right and providing the rancor that nourishes their violence. So how do you drop through a trap door to engage the flip side of these logics? This would be the usual moment to unleash one's radical new proposal, but that would be sad. Because on the flip side, nothing is new and nothing is right. And you can kind of take a hard pass on dramatic and emancipatory manifestos. There's only a chance to rehearse a habit of mind that's been eclipsed. Maybe it's kind of like a blind spot that's been right in front of us, or it's a terra incognita where we've already been. So there's no end, or modernist succession, or moment after culture, maybe only more middle, or medius, or medium, where that word is now free of its associations with communication technologies. So on this flip side, maybe it's easier to see at a different focal length. Beyond declared ideologies is a matrix or medium of activities and latent potentials, the undeclared dispositions that is something like culture's unexpressed muscle memory. Just as medium thinking inverts the typical focus on object and matrix, maybe it can offer some alternative approaches to intractable problems that outwit the most cunning superbugs. To assess and manipulate medium, it's almost as if you have to cultivate a capacity to perceive in a split screen, to straddle mental partitions that separate the nominative from the active and the dispositional. You develop something like a canine mind, because your dog hears you say the word "good girl" in some language, but she would never rely on just a lexical expression. She's looking at 1,000 other affective cues, how close you are to the door of the dog bowl, whether you have a leash in your hand, even your potential for violence, your temperament. Or suddenly in this split screen, even in a simple room, the objects with names, table, chair, lamp, pen, and so on, are bristling with latent potentials, active repertoires and affordances. They're actively performing. Or the stuff in your fridge is triangulating in a kind of periodic table of possible combinations and expiry dates and latent potentials. You see dispositions as clearly, maybe even more clearly than declarations. So in this split screen, turning the sound down on those declarations, it's easier to detect the difference between what organizations are saying and what they're doing, how organizations are decoupling messages and ideologies from their real activity and their underlying potentials and dispositions. So on one side of the screen, the stories about large socio-technical organizations, almost without fail, whether they're railroads or hydroelectric networks or blockchains. The story is always about decentralization and freedom, but the real disposition of the organization may be concentrating power and authority with a universal ambition. Or just to say the most obvious examples of these dispositions that elude us, the smart city maintains the shine of the new even when it centralizes information in ways that violate privacy with a network that's primitive and crude in disposition. Or a social media network, too obvious, purports to be information rich while it filters that information through a dumb binary of likes and dislikes to make everything information poor. Or a global network of Dubai-style zone cities that I study facilitates not its storied free trade, but manipulated trade. Or a centralizing power espouses a populist message, or both the left and right-wing ideologies result in concentrations of authoritarian power. It's not the ideology that's declared, but some other potentials or latent dispositions that are undeclared that are determining outcomes. So take another look at the world's superbugs. They may be the best medium designers. I mean, yes, they cocoon within the loop and the binary. They're capable of monistic demagoguery and head-on brutality, but this is child's play for them. Because like a confidence man, they're also masters of the split screen, of lies and distractions and confusions that seem even to turn lexical expressions into physical force fields. They know how lies work. Telling one lie is a bad idea because that calls for reconciliation and truth, but telling many lies works really well. Many lies creates a kind of Teflon on which rationality begins to slip and slide, unburdened by truth, running rings around earnest declarations. The superbug knows how to make words dance around and fascinate in the absence of meaning and information. Lies are everywhere, animated and in color. They lubricate, they insulate, and the discrepancy that others are trying to futilely reconcile is the material of rumor and contagious fiction. So it's not what lies say, it's how they bounce that's important. The superbug becomes pure medium, activity divorced from content. So the disposition of any organization makes some things possible and some things impossible. It's like a growth medium that determines what will live or die, or an operating system that sets the rules of the game. So it's wildly dangerous to rely on declared ideology when undeclared activity or disposition may facilitate untouchable accumulations of power and environmental forms of violence. But on this flip side, a redoubled territory of operation may offer some extra political and aesthetic capacities, but expectations are inverted. For instance, being right is a really bad idea on the flip side. It's too weak. It doesn't work against gurus and totalitarian bullies. Maybe culture's spectacular failures, together with some underexploited powers in that medium, inspire alternative ways to register this design imagination, form making another key or part of speech. I'm a designer, we're really good at making things with shapes and outlines. But medium design is less like making a thing and more like having your hands on the faders and toggles of organization. It's designing interdependencies and chemistries and chain reactions, benefits from an artistic curiosity about spatial wiring or reagents and spatial mixtures, designing not a single object but a platform for inflecting multiple objects. It's a kind of combinant thinking that Bifa discussed this morning. So medium design would then be something like playing pool, where knowing about one fixed sequence of shots doesn't do you any good, but being able to see a branching network of possibilities allows you to add more information to the table. In pool, you don't know the answer. You don't know that, borrowing from Gilbert Ryle. You only know how to respond to a string of changing conditions over time with some organ of interplay. So you're making something that shouldn't always work and that's indeterminate to be practical. In another inversion, medium design works better not when you eliminate problems, but when you multiply problems and use them to leaven and catalyze each other. So like Parendo's paradox, that counterintuitive game theory that pairs losing games to generate wins, it's as if the losses create a kind of traction against which to make some small gains. So maybe it's not the existence of the content of problems, but just the interplay between problems that's important. And that failure is a limitless wilderness for all kinds of design ecologies. In yet another inversion, more important than the newness or succession of technologies is the relationship between technologies. So then not one species of information, but the mixture of different species of information, like the digital together with the heavy or the spatial would be more information rich. So rejecting the necessity of a digital presence to make the stiff world dance, you might treat heavy, lumpy, physical space as an information system that's already dancing with potentials. Like Gregory Bateson observed, a man, a tree, and an axe is an information system. And just as you design things that shouldn't always work, maybe you also tell histories of things that don't happen. Punctuating events like crises and competitions and victories and defeats, those usually capture the attention of our cultural narratives. But disposition doesn't happen because it's ever present as a latent temperament. So just as an unsafe factory collapses and burns, when that happens, there's an event to mark the violence. But in countless factories or industrial parks that don't happen to buckle under the weight of their own denial, there's no event or drawn sword. There's only latent temperament, the constant aggressions of blatant, imbalanced power dynamics. And a potential, so maybe the histories of things that don't happen might be structured like an epidemiology or a gradient or a branching set of thresholds and points of leverage that might be largely concerned with how to modulate violence in organizations by making them more information rich. So what are those spatio-political reagents or accelerants in those moments of metastasis and remission, like Kubrick's, like I Am Spartacus moment, that had the same power of the superbug to reverse engineer lexical expressions, to make lexical meaning and lexical declaration into dispositional resources. It turned those things, those words, into an inversion and then also into a multiplier. Temperamentally and dispositionally, the slaves could confuse and defang the violence of an authoritarian power. They could create a kind of Teflon of their own. So can you adjust the space, and can we adjust our organizations in ways that are attuned to latent temperament? So in addition to all the declarations and confrontations and the fighting that we will always do, that we're really good at, could we also operate like the parent with squabbling children? The parent with squabbling children doesn't try to come in and parse the argument, litigate the argument that the children are having. Instead, they increase the blood sugar of one child. They introduce a pet into the arms of another. They drop the temperature of the room. They move a chair into the light. They do things to the chemistry of the room so that it no longer induces or supports violence. And thinking back to the superbug skills of discrepancy, while bored with the safety of the purely rhetorical, maybe this design, if it has any hope of affecting change, manipulates organizations as well as instrumental narratives that attend it, with moves that are potentially sneakier and more politically agile. It may be a dissonant story that, however non-physical, has physical consequences. It may be a narrative that makes something contagious. It may have an emotional message that renders some power more vulnerable, or it may have a surprise cultural bounce because of its irrationality, or its outrageousness, or its cuteness, or its creepiness, or its violence. So a stealthier form of activism would mix this design with the gifts and pandas and rumors and meaningless distractions and other totemic fictions that are so effective in culture. So here on this flip side, right answers are mistakes, obligations are more empowering than freedom, histories follow latent aggressions as well as gunshots, messy is smarter than new, you deliberately address problems with responses that shouldn't always work, and maybe you can steal some powers to design a snaking chain of moves to worm into and generate leverage against intractable politics. And like a really good pool player, maybe you also don't call your shots, but keep them guessing. I always say it would be like being too smart to be right. Thank you.
Hi. Wow, that was really loud. Okay. But that served as a good beacon that we're coming to the end of Art After Culture. And if you could take your seats or take your standing, again, if people are more than welcome to stand, sit, wherever for this performance. But before going any further, I just want to take a second and thank a few people who made this day and yesterday and everything possible. First of all, Amal Issa, who's here, who's the head of the programs at e-flux. Yeah, Amal has truly been the force behind this conference, making it all happen. And that's also together with the help of Hallie Ayers and Alicia Toy and Erin Farrow-Murray, who's been doing the sound, as well as Jack, Nick, and Chris doing the live stream and video. Thank you. Thanks to Mariana Silva, who's our art director for e-flux Journal. Incredible. It's been with the journal for as long as it's been a journal, pretty much. And thanks, of course, to Anton, Julieta, Brian, for making the conditions for all of this beautiful madness possible for so long and for it to continue. Yeah. And of course, to everybody who participated and who came from all over, it's really a feat and wonderful. I just wanted to read a little bit from a book by Martha Rossler that came out a few years ago. Exactly, yeah. So we'll invoke her here. She's traveling tomorrow to do, I think, an exhibition that came out of a translation of culture class into Spanish. Anyway, I just wanted to read it quickly. And Martha says here on page 180 of culture class, she says, I am not inclined to follow Debord or Duchamp and give up the terrain of art and culture. Certainly, celebration and lifestyle mania forestall critique. A primary emphasis on enjoyment, fun, or experience precludes the formation of a robust, exigent public discourse. But even ruckuses have their place as disruptive intervention. Some may see them as being less self-interested than social projects, but as fully collective, while fun remains a term that refers to private experience. There is no good prescription for how and in what register to engage with the present conditions of servitude and freedom. And I think that that speaks to what Brian said earlier about the fact that we wouldn't be answering what is art after culture, but maybe speaks to some of the possibilities therein. The only other thing I wanted to say is, other than a million thanks, is that it just feels really healthy that we've talked a lot about death today and yesterday. I think that this is like, and following the new Red Order's invocation of, I guess it comes from statues also die, but that, you know, culture might be this botany of death. Just feels very appropriate. Okay, so for the last performance of tonight, very, very glad to welcome Basel Abbas and Ruanne Abu-Ram. And these two artists work together across a range of media, some of which you'll see in a moment. Their works probe a contemporary landscape marked by seemingly perpetual crisis and an endless present shaped by a politics of desire and disaster. Their approach has largely constituted of sampling materials, both existing and authored, and recasting them into new scripts. The result is a practice that investigates the political, visceral, and material possibilities of sound, image, text, object, and sight, taking on the form of multimedia installations and live sound image performances. And with that, we will come to the live image sound performance. Please join me in welcoming Ruanne and Basel to e-flux. Thank you all so much.
كلما نبرز نظهر كآثار كأخطاء كثير مضادة أرتينا بيد المستحيل نتعلم حول آليات الإنسان معلومات فيزيكية العود المؤشر حاجتنا إلى وعي جديد يتجلى عند الحدود المرعبة حيث الوجود والبشر واختفاء يتداول تلك هي الحدود المرعبة التي تفرض علينا أن نكون حيث المقاومة ملحة ويصبح الوعي الحاجة إلى معرفة غير مألوفة وغير صفات